Hi everyone, my name is Leah Kopke and I'm a 3D motion design freelancer. I also have a podcast where each week I cover another 3D modeling tool for Cinema 4D. Hello and welcome. In today's episode, we're going to go over the open Subdiv settings for the Subdivision surface tool. And after this, you will know all the settings and tools for Subdivision surface modeling. We went over Subdivision surface modeling, and we had 3D modeled this candy jar going through the different hotkeys and settings for the Subdivision surface. In the next episode after that, we went over how to 3D model a gummy shark using weight subdivision surface and the subdivision surface tools. I'll leave links to those episodes in the description below in case if you'd like to watch those first. Episode 73 is focused on Open Subdiv, which was originally designed by Pixar and made open source so that it would also be available in other 3D packages to have things be more universal. By the end of this episode, you'll know all the settings and tools for subdivision surface modeling, and all that would really be left to do is to continue practicing, but you have your base to build off of, which is the most important, which you'll get from watching these. Let's go ahead and jump inside of Cinema 4D and get started. Here we are inside of Cinema 4D. Let's talk about these examples I have here on my screen. We'll run through all the final settings. This first model here is our original mesh before I add a subdivision surface or make any changes to it, add any weighting to it. This is our original mesh. You can see I made it with a sweep, and I swept one rectangle around the other to create that form. If you want to learn more about the sweep tool and how it works, I have another episode on the sweep that you can check out in the description below where we do a little bit of 3D modeling with that tool. This is our original mesh, and this is what happens when we apply these different types of subdivision surface. So let's go ahead and talk about these three types here. Our first one is Open Subdiv Bilinear. This one doesn't apply any smoothing to your mesh when it subdivides it. It just adds additional subdivisions, and you'll see you have your subdivision for your viewport settings here, and you have your subdivision render settings here. If I increase these for the render, it'll only increase the subdivisions within the render. If I increase these for the viewport, they'll only increase them for the viewport. You can see that as I increase these, you'll see that there are just more subdivisions showing up in here. And this is for all of the different open subdiv options here listed. You'll see that setting there. You'll also see linear pre-subdivision, but we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later. For this first kind of subdivision surface, the important thing to know is that it does not smooth your mesh. It maintains the initial form pretty well, and it is good for creating denser meshes for situations like dynamics when you want more calculations or collisions to bring up that accuracy. You can increase your mesh density here. You can also use the remesh tool to do that, and I'll leave a link to that episode below in case if you're interested in learning about the remesh tool. Our next couple of types of subdivision surface is Open Subdiv Loop and Open Subdiv Catmull-Clark. So I'll click on this one here. You can see that for this one we have Open Subdiv Loop selected, and it has some different settings here. It still has the familiar subdivision viewport, subdivision render, those are familiar. It still has the familiar linear pre-subdivision here, but it has some additional options here, and we're going to talk about these. If I click on Open Subdiv Catmull Clark, you'll see many of the similar settings again. You'll see Subdivision, Viewport Subdivision Renderer, and Linear Pre-Subdivision. So there's a lot of overlap between these two. The main differences between these two is that this one triangulates the mesh and smooths it. So this is good for game development because when you're importing a mesh into something like Unreal Engine, it's better to have the mesh triangulated. And we talk a little bit about triangulation in another episode. This is just another option on how you can do that. I'll leave the link to triangulation and why you may need it in your meshes below, but that's good for game development and good for importing into Unreal Engine. This additionally smooths out your mesh. So this one over here, it keeps everything quads, which can be useful for 3D modeling inside of Cinema 4D. Quads are the best option for 3D modeling within Cinema 4D. Sometimes you'll need triangles for when you export out to something else, but for here, quads are the best. So this one, Catmull Clark, is a good option here. But both of them smooth it out and the forms are very similar. Those are the main differences. And down here, we'll talk a little bit more about these other options. You'll see there's an option called Subdivide UVs. This adjusts how your UVs are on your subdivided surface. I'd prefer to bake down a model and adjust the UVs rather than try to adjust it in here. That's my personal preference because I feel like these never really come out exactly the way I want them to. But that's my personal preference for these UV options. But I'll show you the error that they're talking about here. So this has this checkerboard texture added in here. I just used the tile and imported this into the color and picked some colors for that. So you don't see it right now, but if I were to hit IPR, you can see this begin to render, and we have this checkerboard pattern on here. Right now, I don't have the subdivision surface on, but this is how the original mesh looks with that texture on it. When I turn on the subdivision surface, you can see that it becomes a little bit distorted while this is being smoothed out. I prefer to fix this again by baking this down and using the make editable option for fixing those texturing errors, and then just going into the UV settings and adjusting it more here. There's an entire UV edit mode you can click on up in this corner if you'd like to adjust the textures a little bit more and really get into UV mapping. We aren't going down that rabbit hole today because that's an entire other subject, but I wanted you to be aware of those settings and what they're there for and how I would approach this problem a little bit. I'll go back to standard mode. So that's the first thing that I'd like to just go over. There's this boundary interpolation option as well for the open subdiv, and I'm actually going to show this on this mesh over here. I'll turn off the subdivision surface so you can see the original mesh. You can see that all of these come together as points. So this mesh over here, I want to show as an example for the edge and corner option here within the subdivision surface. I'd like to show you some details about what happens to these corners and edges once you subdivide it, these boundaries. So these open edges here, those are called your boundaries on the mesh. It's when a mesh isn't closed like this and it has an open edge, that's a boundary. So boundary interpolation is referring to that. When I turn on the subdivision surface, you'll notice that it's taking into consideration those edges. While having this on, I have edge and corner on, so it's taking into consideration both the edges and the corners. And I want to talk a little bit about what that actually means for your mesh. So let's zoom in here. You can see that this is it with the edges and corners subdivision surface off. So the subdivision surface is off right now. This is the original. If I turn it on and I have this set to edge, you can see this is a little bit more rounded than the original. So I'll turn this on and off now, and you'll see it's a little bit more rounded. If I change this from just edge to taking in consideration the boundary edges to edge and corner, this becomes pointed. So this is before, this is after. Edge and corner handles those corners better. Now, something that I want to point out is that it's not handling all the corners well, just so they can troubleshoot things a little bit better. You'll notice that it handles the corner of that quad well. But if you have something like this here, where it's 3 triangles, and we turn on the subdivision surface, it's still being rounded because it has an easier time calculating those points on quads and not on triangles. So good to be aware of while you're working on your topology. And we've been talking a lot about how to fix topology. This is just something to be aware of in this setting if you're wondering why your corners are becoming curved, even though you have edge and corner turned on. That's why you probably have some triangles in your mesh. If you remove those triangles, it'll be nice and sharp like this corner over here that's made up by quads. So that's something to keep in mind. You have some options for how triangles are subdivided. In here, you have cat mark and you have smooth. You can just try both of these and see what you like here. Sometimes the differences between them are very subtle, but it's something you can check out. And I just try both and see what you prefer for your topology. We have this additional option, edge crease. So what is edge crease? Let's talk about that a little bit over here. So for these models, they're very similar with subtle differences between them. And we're going to use these as examples to talk about edge crease. So this is being calculated 2 different ways. There's this option and uniform down here. And we have these 2 objects here. So this one here that's being highlighted, that's uniform. And then there's this one here on the left, that's the second option. And we'll zoom in here. And you'll see these look pretty similar. I had used the tool we went over last episode that we talked about the weight subdivision surface in order to weight these. So you can see that the form's a little bit different here because of how I've weighted this. I've weighted this outer edge using this tool to make it nice and tight instead of curved like that. So I tightened up that edge. I also tightened up these 3 loops. I'm selecting them with the hotkey UL for loop selection. We've gone over that tool. I'll leave it in the description. But you could see that these are also weighted to 100%, and that's on both of these models here, that they're both weighted to 100%. The only difference between these 2, again, are the edge crease settings. And you can already see how it's affecting the shading a little bit on the mesh. If I were to turn on the IPR here, and let's actually create a new standard material just so you could see this a little bit more. We'll make this material maybe a light blue color, and it has a little bit of roughness. I'll name this light blue. And while we're at this, we might as well name the second one checkerboard. I'll apply this to both of these. And you'll see the main difference of these is when you start weighting the edges, how the shading is between them. So this one is the uniform one. You can see the shading is a little bit more uniform, hence the name between the weighted edges. This one is not set to uniform, and it almost looks like there's some wrinkles in here, like it's not perfectly smooth, the shading here. So that's the different interpolation there, just good to be aware of. We have this last option here, linear pre-subdivision, and then you can truly call yourself an expert in subdivision surface modeling because you would have known all of the settings. So this one is a fun one. I'm actually going to go up here to this one as an example. This is here for all the open subdiv types. For this one, what this does is it adds in edges prior to subdividing and smoothing. It helps define the form a little bit more and affects how it's smoothed. And you'll see what I mean. So this is it on 0. If we increase it to 1, it looks a little bit more rectangular like the first option. If we increase it to 2, it looks even more rectangular. And the bevel is a little bit tighter. It doesn't look like a donut anymore. And so on. 4 is quite a few subdivisions. But you could see that that is affecting that bevel there. So it's just becoming a little bit tighter as we increase the linear subdivision. And that is our last setting for today. So I hope you enjoyed learning about subdivision surface modeling, and we'll go through more 3D modeling tools. We've almost covered all of the 3D modeling tools within the mesh chapter of the manual, which for me is very exciting, and I think it's exciting for you too. I hope to see you next time here on Ambient 3D Animations. Thank you for 3D modeling with me.